Gross. Fabulous. We always do post this webinar so that members who aren't able to join, because things do happen, can watch it afterwards. Hello, hello, Tamio friends. We're going to let everybody kind of join the session, and we'll start maybe a minute after we've enabled the chat. So if you want to drop into the chat box, your name, your city, what you're looking forward to doing when you're at conference in 2 weeks, we'd love to hear from you. Good session today. Hey, Dustin, it's good to see you. Woohoo! Hi, Tatiana. All right. We are right at 11 o'clock, and I know we have a lot to talk about today. So I'm going to go ahead and start, and folks can join us as they go. Good morning. Good morning. This is our Tamio May webinar, and we are very excited that you're here with us today. Today, we are focusing on connecting with unengaged residents, and maybe there are residents who want to be engaged but are commonly overlooked. And today, that's what we're talking about. It is very important, we know as communicators, to make sure that we engage well with all of the members of our community, but it can be very challenging to not only identify all of our demographics in our cities, but then to learn how to effectively communicate with them in channels and methodologies that are appropriate for each. I am Shauna Haley. I'm the director of, vice president, I should say, for education and development for Tamio, and I'm your host today. I do want to give a special shout out to Rhonda Simpson with FEMA, who put together today's panel. And then, as we were chatting before the webinar started, weather has rolled in across our region, and she has been deployed with FEMA, and so she's not able to join us today. But this panel is a product of her efforts, and we really appreciate what she did. So I won't delay in getting us started. We have brought together a tremendous panel today of experts on communicating with communities who are within our communities that we might not be doing a great job of engaging with. And so they're going to discuss ways that we can do better to better connect, better engage, better hear from them, and better serve our residents. So I think what we'll do to start, and I'm going to apologize for my voice. I came back from vacation sick, so you're just going to have to endure that. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves and tell us briefly about their organizations and the communities that they're working with. And I'm going to work around the clock. So next to me is Donnie Green, and I'll have Donnie kick it off.
Good morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate today. I am with the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and I administer the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging and Aging and Disability Resource Center. So just a little bit about our Area Agency on Aging. We were created by federal legislation back in the 60s, and we receive funding from both the federal and state governments through the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. And we plan, provide, and support services for people age 60 and over, family caregivers of older adults, as well as older caregivers of either grandchildren or young adults with disabilities. So our services are not means tested. So unlike Medicaid, people don't have to have low incomes to qualify for our services, but we are asked to target people who are at risk. And so as we promote our services, we design outreach strategies to reach older people who may be experiencing economic need, who may be isolated, who may live in rural areas, who may be living with disabilities, who may have limited English proficiency. So each year we support about 15,000 older adults and family caregivers who receive ongoing services. And then we also touch a lot of people who are looking for one-time information and referral. And the major program that we support is Meals on Wheels, but we also have a lot of other social service programs. We help people understand public benefits. We provide in-home services. We provide education on topics of interest to older adults and family caregivers. We provide respite care to caregivers. We do health workshops to keep older adults engaged and active, and we also advocate for people who live in nursing facilities and assisted living facilities. So everything that we do is provided without charge. In the state of Texas, most of the area agencies on aging are administered by councils of governments, but there are also some area agencies on aging that are sponsored by nonprofit organizations as well as local governments.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Cynthia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia Lemus, and I am the bilingual communication coordinator for the city of Arlington. And my main job is to reach out to the Hispanic community in our city. Arlington is the 5th most diverse city in the United States, and it keeps growing. Almost 30% of our residents are Latino background, and most of them don't speak English. So after COVID, the city of Arlington saw the need to have someone who can not just translate the information for our residents, but also to be able to close that gap with the Hispanic community. And that's my job, is to try to connect with the Hispanic community and try to have content for them, not just in Spanish, but also in English, because even though when we think about Hispanic or Latinos, we think about Spanish, that they only speak Spanish. But we have a lot of residents who are Latino background who prefer the information in Spanish, in English, I'm sorry, but they still wants to be connected with the Hispanic customs and be able to, to get identified as Hispanic. So that's my main job, to connect with the Hispanic community in the city of Arlington.
Thank you. And Crystal.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Goodwin. I work for the Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, called TCDD for short. We are a Texas governor appointed board. We have 27 members. 60% of those individuals have developmental disabilities or are their direct families and caregivers. The rest of the council board is made up of professionals in the field. We focus on improving systems and sources of information for individuals with DD and their families. We are not a direct service provider, but we are a statewide organization. And then my personal job here at TCDD is the Public Health and Disability Integration Specialist. So a lot of my work focuses on improving accessibility and inclusivity across public health systems in Texas, including the disaster management cycle.
All right. Well, Crystal, since we appreciate that, since we just ended with you, I'd like to start this next question directed to you to answer. Why do you feel like the community that you serve is unengaged or might struggle with being engaged?
Absolutely. I think both in terms of DD and just overall disability in Texas, our systems are extremely difficult to navigate. Our systems are also siloed, which means a lot of families don't have the capacity to check every single system that may have different resources. And a lot of those systems are not actively trying to reach out to the DD community. On top of that, you add work, you add children, you add language or internet barriers, and it's making it even harder to make regular routine appointments, let alone something in terms of crisis. It's often unclear where to go with questions for families or individuals to learn what resources are available or even how to access the information that is out there. And we also unfortunately do see that some of our families and individuals are afraid to have our systems identify them in some way. And then we also see cultural considerations where a lot of cultures in Texas specifically do encourage self-sufficiency rather than getting support from public systems, which just leads to even further alienation from the support systems we do know that exist.
I'll throw that same question to you, Donnie. Why is it a struggle?
I think a lot of the dynamics that affect access to services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities also affect older adults. I would absolutely echo Crystal's statement that the system is complex and fragmented. And, funding for social services is so limited that most providers really struggle to keep up with demand, let alone outreach to people who may be eligible for services but aren't receiving them. Kind of a startling statistic, Texas has more people on its wait list for Medicaid waiver services than all other 49 states combined. And for some of the waivers for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, 15 years and longer before families can receive services. So again, I think that the complexity of the system really creates some tremendous challenges. But I would also say that older adults are not necessarily unengaged or isolated. One of the distinctions I'd like to make is that older adults are really not a monolith. That tremendous diversity when it comes to older adults. And in my world, older adults are people age 60 and over. And as of a few months ago, I am now one of they. And I'm also caregiver for my 87-year-old mother, and we are worlds apart in terms of how we spend our time, our abilities, our challenges, our preferences. So, again, one of the key takeaways is to keep in mind that that there is tremendous diversity when we're talking about older adults, and some pretty significant differences in terms of cohort groups. So, as I mentioned, I just turned 60. I'm part of the tail end of the baby boom, or kind of a shadow boomer. And, I, like many people in my peer group, still working, trying to balance career and family responsibilities. My mother is in the silent generation, and, she's over the age of 85. And people age 85 and over, are more likely to be dealing with disability, with poverty, with isolation. So as we think about our responsibility to conduct outreach, we try really hard to reach those people who are in that age cohort. We also recognize that women are more likely to be living in poverty, more likely to be living alone, because we tend to marry older people and outlive them. And also there are some huge differences, some really thorny racial disparities when it comes to income, when it comes to disability rates. So, so, um, so as I think about older adults who may not be engaged, I'm thinking more specifically of those people who are dealing with those barriers related to income, who are more likely to be dealing with disability issues, who are kind of less likely to be actively engaged in their communities. And so much of what we do in terms of outreach is partnering with organizations. But the $50,000 question is, how do you reach those people on the waiver wait list? How do you reach those people who are not receiving home delivered meals, or who are not actively receiving healthcare services? So, those are the kinds of questions that keep me awake at night. We've kind of stumbled on some things that work pretty well some of the time, but I can't say that we figured it out completely. And I would also say that to really figure it out and to meet the need would require a substantial increase in funding in both federal and state funds, which is unlikely. And so again, that's one of the reasons why we really have to be mindful of our targeting obligations and think about, how we're reaching those people who are at risk of adverse outcomes.
Cynthia, you were talking about the sheer size of your population. So why do you think that there's a struggle to be engaged?
From the Hispanic community perspective, I feel the main reasons are, first, language barrier. Most of them, they don't speak English. They don't feel represented. They don't feel like maybe the way that we promote some programs are related to them, and a lot of online misinformation. I have noticed that a lot of people get their news from Facebook, which is good, but as long as you get it from the right sources. So I think those reasons start like creating problems for people to trust the local governments, to trust real agencies that can help them, because they don't know which is true, which is not. I remember my mom last year sent me a video from Facebook. She lives in California, in Los Angeles, and she asked me, "Is this true?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Can you check the city's website? Because I'm not sure about this information." It was about this major road construction that was happening in Los Angeles. And when you hear traffic, you get scared, especially in LA. And if you hear more traffic, my mom collapsed. And I asked him, "Why don't you check the website, the city website?" And she said, "Because I don't understand it," even though she speaks English. And I was like, "Well, you speak English, or a little bit of English. You can understand." And she said, "I understand the words, but I don't understand the meaning of the words. I don't understand the message." So I was like, okay, she speaks English, but she still don't understand what's happening. So it's not just that you have to speak the language, it's the way that you speak to these people. And I feel like sometimes we kind of forget that we, it's not just that you can communicate in words with these people, but we need to try to speak the way that they speak, so they can understand and they can be more engaged on different content, different videos, and different information that we want them to really understand.
Let me unmute myself. I want to have you expand on that, if you don't mind, Cynthia. Tell us a little bit about some of the better practices that you've found for engaging. Like, how are you speaking the way people need to be spoken to?
First, you need to understand your community. You need to know your audience, so you know who are you talking to. So if, for example, if you want to promote a services, if it's something for a family, like a family event, you talk to them as something fun, as something like your kids can enjoy, that you can enjoy, that your teenagers can enjoy. So they kind of connect with all these activities, all these programs. So it's more like what's there for them, so you can kind of like talk to them about it. Sometimes we have great grammar in our articles. We kind of like have all these paragraphs lay down, but we forget that people just read the title of the article. And so you have to connect with those people the way that they speak. And sometimes we forget that.
Crystal, what would you add to that? What are some best practices that are working in the disability community?
Absolutely. And so I think something that we have found a lot of success with, TCDD actually does fund a multiple community-based grants on a variety of topics, as we are not direct service providers ourselves. However, the best practice that we have seen is peer-to-peer models are really, really important, especially in a state that is as large and as diverse as Texas. We have seen it with individuals with developmental disabilities themselves, their parents, their service providers. Everyone wants to talk to somebody with similar experiences who actually understand their needs and challenges. And they want to talk to someone that they trust, whether that's a singular person or if that's an organization within their community. And so we at TCD just think our job is to try and understand who actually has trust in a community and why does that individual or organization have that trust, and then support that trusted entity as much as we can to get the message out to individuals. So often we at TCDD reach out to what we call champions in our local communities. And these are those trusted individuals or entities in general. And not only do these people have the most similar connection to the individuals we're trying to connect with, but they also do understand the subgroups within a community. Because while, you know, disability is a subgroup of the population, developmental disability is a further subgroup of disability, much like Donnie was speaking. Even developmental disability, that is not a monolith. It's not a singular type of person. And there's a lot of cultural considerations that you can miss when you're not talking within a community. I think one of the most successful things we've seen is we have partnered multiple times with an organization called Texas Advocates. They are a self-advocacy network that spans across Texas, and they do have local chapters, and they have led some really successful initiatives and conversations because the entire organization is peer-to-peer connection and getting that person who completely understands the geographical location, the culture within that, and then also the side of disability and developmental disability has been critical to our conversations.
Donnie, how would you address that with our very diverse group of seniors?
And again, I think there are some similarities in terms of approach. I agree with Crystal that identifying those community champions is really important, particularly to reach those people who are not being touched by a service provider. And that takes a while, and that takes knowing your community, which can be difficult when you're a regional organization like ours. I would say that particularly as we think about reaching older adults, that there's still a place for what I consider old school approaches. So there are a lot of older adults who do not have access to the internet because they never learned the technology. And my mother is one of those. She was a professional who retired within a week of her employer saying that she would have to start doing her nurse's notes in electronic format. And to this day, she has not touched a computer. She's convinced that if she does, it'll blow up. So although we're working to enhance our presence on social media, we also rely quite a bit on press releases and flyers, and we really want to reach those people who are not connected. And of people age 65 and over, about 25% don't have internet access. Even smartphones, about 4 of 10 older adults do not have smartphones. So our challenge is kind of living in both worlds. So in addition to that, our relationships with professionals are very, very important. Whether that's kind of our traditional partners, I see that we've got Melinda with the city of Louisville, who has worked for many, many years as a senior center manager. We love the senior centers because they are highly visible, trusted places where older adults can go, not only for nutrition and socialization, but also good information. So we partner with senior centers. We fund the Meals on Wheels program. So many times we have asked for their help in terms of pushing information out to older adults who are homebound and not able to, to get information from other community sources. We're also working at getting information out to local providers of emergency financial assistance. Again, we want to target those people who may be experiencing financial crisis, pushing information out to low-income housing communities. And then we've also worked really hard in terms of establishing relationships with healthcare providers. And prior to me joining the Council of Governments 27 years ago, I'd worked in healthcare. And so, that's typically a point at which an older adult may start to need some services. If she experiences a change in in healthcare status, experiences an illness or an injury. So we want to make the information available to primary care providers and hospitals and home health agencies, rehabilitation facilities. We find that they're really good partners in terms of making information about our services available to older adults as they start to experience need for supports. So then we've also worked to kind of identify communication hotspots. So as we think about reaching people with low incomes, we send people out to post flyers at laundromats and Medicaid offices if they will let us in the door. Also, we think about venues such as VFW halls, and then we've also done quite a bit of work, particularly in the early days of COVID, in developing stronger partnerships with facilities, skilled nursing facilities and assisted living facilities. They're all required to have emergency plans. We were really surprised when we surveyed them on even basic information. Do you know who your local emergency response coordinator is? And I think we found that over half said nope. And so, we want to be mindful that even though people may be living in residential care facilities, there may be some significant gaps in terms of preparedness. So again, whenever we are able to kind of educate our partners and be parts of coalitions, we find that that's really helpful to all of us. And again, the greatest challenge is reaching those who are not being touched by agencies.
So Cynthia, can you address how communicators can be more inclusive in engagement efforts?
Sure. First, I think we need to know our audience, who is part of our community, so we know who we're talking to, and celebrate our community. Sometimes we forget how proud we are of who we are. Hispanic community, they're very proud of their country, their customs. So if I have a calendar on my desk that has all these Heritage Month and important dates for different community groups. So even though I'm Salvadorian, I'm from El Salvador, I'm not Mexican. So I try to connect with the Mexican people, celebrate Cinco de Mayo, things like that. So people feel represented and people feel part of the community, the city. If they feel represented, they can have more trust, and you can close that gap on communication. So if you want to be more inclusive in your engagement in social media, post pictures that represent everybody in the community. I see a lot of events or posts on social media about events, and they have almost the same type of family that they post. And I'm like, okay, well, if I don't feel represented, how do you want me to go to these events? So those are good ways to try to communicate with your community. Also, some people ask me, what about if I don't speak the language, if I don't speak Spanish? Well, you don't have to speak Spanish as long as that you can connect with these people. Sometimes just having something Spanish on your website, or if you have a flyer, try to have like the Spanish translation on the other side. Things like that will help people to trust your agency. So things like that will be good to increase engagement with your residents.
Now, I know this is not on the question list, but you have a Spanish language Facebook page, correct?
Yes.
How, when you launched that when you joined the city, is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
How much engagement have you gotten on that page? I'm just curious.
It has increased a lot. We have almost 21,000 people who follows the page. And I remember when they first hired me, they were like, okay, we're gonna have a Facebook page, an Instagram, Snap, all the platforms. And I was like, okay, hold on. That's a lot of work, first. And second, I know the Hispanic community, they don't use Instagram as much as Facebook. So let's start with Facebook. And now last year we had the Spanish website. So we kind of translate all the important information. We have articles in Spanish. We have organic content for our Hispanic community.
Awesome. That's a really great success story. Let me ask the broader question back to you, Crystal. Like, how can we be more inclusive in our communications, particularly with the disability community?
Absolutely. I definitely think it's difficult for people who are external to a particular group of people to be welcome or trusted, especially when talking to specific portions of the disability community. And that's why our peer-to-peer models have been so effective in the state. I believe we really need to do better about identifying who in our communities can be trusted sources of information, resources, and then connect with those people first. And then after that connection, we can better adapt and offer more meaningful conversations and communication to the individuals that we're trying to reach, especially in the disability community. And this means bringing in those trusted partners at the beginning of the conversations and not already when the plan has been made. They really need to be a part of the design and strategy in all of our efforts to inform them, and not just be like, here, yeah, I heard you're trusted in your community. We made this really pretty flyer. Can you share it, please? Because it's that is very much not an effective strategy to communicate with trusted individuals. I also said, it's important to realize that individuals with disabilities, and specifically individuals with DD, are not a monolith. When you're speaking to a specific community, you do have to consider their subgroups. And this can include things along the lines of race, ethnicity, religion, other cultural factors that may exist within a community. And additionally, we always encourage plain language. And plain language is just a simplified, I shouldn't say simplified, but a different form of speaking that can be better understood by those with developmental disabilities, but also other groups of individuals who may have limited English proficiency, like the Hispanic community or Asian communities that we see across Texas, or people who just may be illiterate due to educational reasons or have limited reading abilities. And so plain language is something that we always encourage across everything, whether that be when speaking or when writing flyers and website updates, especially when you're trying to get information to a community. And this has actually been a conversation we've had quite a bit with the disaster side of things. I've spoken with some people at FEMA and other disaster management places across the state of how important plain language can be in emergency communication, specifically when it is extremely pertinent that communities get information quickly and actually understand what's being said, and how to figure out that communication barrier of making sure you're getting across the correct information with enough of the content, but also making sure it's easy to understand.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask this question now. It's not on our list, but I know it's going to come in. Crystal, you've mentioned several times peer-to-peer network, peer-to-peer network. Tell us what you mean by peer-to-peer. I mean, I'm assuming you're saying this is a trusted network of peers that we communicate with, who then communicate with their audiences. But how did you identify who those peers were? How did you start that process? And how many do you have in that network that you work with?
Absolutely. So yes, peer-to-peer network can mean individuals within a community to other individuals within a community. So for example, I have mentioned the advocacy network, Texas Advocates. That is a self-advocacy network, which means individuals with DD leading those conversations with other individuals. But peer-to-peer can also be trusted organizations within a community leading those conversations. I'm not going to say it's easy. Finding and maintaining relationships with peer-to-peer networks is a daunting task, but it comes with so much good conversations. It comes with more effective communication, and it comes with better outcomes. And so it's important to try and maintain and find those relationships. I can't say it's a one size fit all. It's not always going to be the same strategy walking into, say, somewhere like Dallas versus somewhere like Laredo, which we've had a lot of conversations down in Laredo. And with Laredo, we connected with some peer-to-peer networks through their public health department. And that was because they had staff there who was a parent for a child with a developmental disability. And so she was very well connected within her system. I can't speak exactly how many peer-to-peer networks we have. I don't know if there's a strict number on that I can give you, but it is something we're always trying to find more of. And it's just finding those champions within communities and reaching out. Some communities do have already established boards where it's a bunch of different organizations who do various outreach throughout the year. And some of them is just, putting out hey, we are looking for self-advocates who are interested in connecting. So we did that actually during COVID. We had what was called our Best Shot Street Team. This was at the time where we were providing a lot of vaccination information and requests for the COVID vaccine. And this was a grassroots organization that started with one person, and we found interested parties who then went out and had their own conversations within their own communities. And like I said, it is a lot of upfront work. It is not an easy one-step process, and you do have to maintain those relationships. But the outcomes are so incredibly significant that it's definitely worth it to try and find those people.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Donnie, I don't want to ignore our original question about how to be more inclusive with engagement when we're talking to our seniors.
Yeah, and I think Cynthia made some great points about just kind of recognizing diversity. That certainly holds true when it comes to language, when it comes to age. And so as we're developing communications, we try hard to just recognize that diversity, whether it's, different age cohort groups or racial diversity, functional ability. I do see a lot of ageism. And so, I think it's important we recognize that aging and disability are not synonymous, that the longer we live, the greater the risk that we'll develop a disability. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that we tend to respond better to messages that are positive in the approach, even if the subject matter is very serious. And, I know in my household, every time the SPCA commercial comes on with Sarah McLachlan singing about the arms of the angels and the abused puppies, my husband turns to me and says, I hate that commercial. And it may be very powerful, and I think it's true. It may be compelling, but I think as best we can, that it's important to be positive in the approach. And so as we've kind of gotten better at developing brochures, we've tried to use positive images. So, maybe it's the dog being adopted from the shelter instead of locked in the cage. So we try to use bright images. We are always sensitive to the issue of readability. And so we always want to make sure that with print materials that, the type size is large enough and there's good contrast. We try to avoid reverse print that may kind of disappear on the page. I think plain language is so important. And another thing that I'm very sensitive to as a gerontologist is terms like the elderly or seniors to me are kind of like fingernails on a chalkboard. Again, not a monolithic group. And so what we've tried to do is just avoid the use of those terms and be descriptive. For example, are you at least 60 years of age? If so, you qualify for our programs. Another thing that is important to us, and it really came out of the disability community, is using people first language. So, my father died from dementia. He dealt with cancer over his lifetime. He was never an Alzheimer's patient or a dementia patient. He was my dad, a former college president who developed disabilities that eventually took his life, but he was not defined by those disabilities. And so as we're creating materials, we don't refer to the older community. Again, it's not a well-defined community. It's made up of people. And I once worked for a nun, and one of her sayings that really resonated is, she would say that demographics are people with the tears wiped away. So we want to make sure that we recognize those individual differences, and that we always put the emphasis on the person rather than the disability. So beyond that, I think there's tremendous value in kind of vetting materials before we take them live. And it's kind of consistent with this whole idea of peer support, that, we shouldn't assume that that people understand what we're trying to communicate. And so if we have the ability to kind of, take materials in front of a client, a potential client, or a group, I think there's really valuable feedback that can be provided.
Well, Donnie, can you tell me about one engagement effort that you're particularly proud of?
You bet. And it's not terribly innovative, but one of the things that has worked best for us is just taking advantage of those relationships with our Meals on Wheels providers. So, each year they touch about 8 or 9,000 homebound uh, older adults, the vast majority of whom are living in poverty. So, we really capitalize on that trusted relationship to get the message out. Another thing that we've done is whenever we've had money for outreach materials, and we typically don't have much funding that is dedicated for purposes other than direct services, but we've we've printed a brief message on pharmacy bags. And as we think about our obligation to reach older persons who may be living with disabilities, we thought that that might be a good way to touch people who are not affiliated with an agency. Um, Again, kind of our target market would be filling prescriptions. We've also worked hard at educating our healthcare partners, really focusing on hospital discharge planners and home health social workers and rehab discharge planners as well. And again, that's for the purpose of trying to reach people at a time of need who may have been doing well, but are confronted with an illness or an injury. Things have kind of changed. And that tends to be when people are more likely to need support services such as ours. And that's the point at which they, they tend to be more receptive to the information.
What about you, Crystal? You talked about the shoot your shot a little bit. What other would you say is something that you're particularly proud of?
Absolutely. Actually, as we talk about being culturally aware and, those language barriers, a couple years ago, we actually did fund an organization named Light and Salt Association for a grant period that focused on improving the quality of life and resources in a community for Asian Americans who had developmental disabilities. So this is really when we're getting into having those conversations about subgroups of subgroups. Right. And this organization did a ton of work within the community. They did a ton of public awareness for DD work, not only through our normal avenues of, webinars and those workshops and fairs, but they actually also did work on TV and radios and even established a helpline that not only was provided in English, but was also provided in multiple Asian specific languages to reach out to that community that is very often not directly reached out to. They went on to give community-based, both culturally and linguistic services and supports to over 100 individuals with DD within their grant period. And all of this focused on a variety of topics that included daily tasks of living or job skills training to get these individuals prepared. And they also went on to empower over 100 family members with different seminars and trainings on how to raise children and families with DD. And this included individual counseling for those family members in those different languages as they needed. And so this project was completely focused on outreach to a specific portion of our DD community. And it not only improved community relationships between the organization and what this webinar considers unengaged residents or, unreached out to residents, but it also included tons of creation and information and sharing about resources and supports in the Asian American community as a whole, and really supporting those with developmental disabilities in that specific subgroup of individuals, and really advanced our cultural awareness and making sure that those individuals were taken care of in their own culture and their own language, and not just an outside organization coming in and going, well, we're going to translate things and that'll be good enough. And so it was very culturally aware and informed.
Cynthia, how would you answer that? What's one that you're particularly proud of? Oops, you're still on mute.
Sorry. Besides the Spanish Facebook page that I'm very proud of because we are able to inform and educate our Hispanic community, two major communication campaigns that we did last year was city budget, and the new trash pickup system. Because I noticed how people are very interested in those topics. Budget is a complex topic for everybody, not just Hispanic. Everybody is confused about the topic. They don't kind of understand what's happening. So imagine for someone who speak a little or no English. So it's more difficult. And having all these campaigns in Spanish, like everything in Spanish, help a lot to the community to understand how the city use the money from taxes and all those juicy stuff. And with trash, it was so surprising to me that people message us asking about recycling. They didn't even know that they can recycle. So all these questions, all these topics, it's very important for me to educate and inform the community. So I'm very proud of those communication campaigns.
How much of, just out of curiosity, of what you do is in alignment with the city's broader communication efforts, or is it running a completely separate strategy for Spanish?
We try to do everything in English and Spanish, but sometimes I cannot create the same content, so I try to adapt the content to the Hispanic community. And I would say maybe 80% of the content we try to do in different languages.
Awesome. All right, our last question, then we'll open up questions to the audience. Donnie, what's one takeaway that you'd like people to remember from today's conversation?
Yeah, and I think we've all made the point this morning, but just recognize the importance of trust and connection, and identify organizations that may have goals that are aligned, join together. And for those people who are not affiliated with organizations, it's really trying to identify those local or community leaders, maybe somebody from church or somebody from a neighborhood association.
All right, thank you. And I would add, because we took over care for an elderly family member, don't discount the Walmart eye doctor clinics and bankings, like bank inside the grocery store and whatnot, because it's surprising how much senior connection they have. I was shocked at that hidden network. All right, Crystal, what one takeaway would you like folks to have?
I think Donnie really hit the nail on the head. It's really important to look at putting time and effort on the front side of things to make those one-on-one connections locally and build that needed trust. And it is a lot of work on the front end, but it is so incredibly worth it. We at TCDD, we always like to say, we don't do things the way we've always done it. We always are incorporating evaluation measures to see if what we're doing is actually working or not, and if it isn't, we're modifying as much as we can. And just remember to allow those trusted partners to come to the table early and participate in not only giving out and doing your services, but the development and evaluation of those efforts. A quote that I love is that it's so important to remember that it's not all about what you bring to the table, but who your table is surrounded by.
Nice. Cynthia.
Don't feel discouraged if you don't speak another language. That's our point. We don't want you to sign up to Spanish classes right now. No. The point is to try to understand your community, know who's part of your community. So you are going to be able to create more, a better environment for them. So even though if you have contents in English, that's fine, as long as you represent everybody in the community.
I did have a follow-up question for you, Cynthia. Like, if you don't have funding or staffing to start this, what would you recommend that people do to start? Hey, we want to do better, but we don't have capacity. We don't know how to do it.
I get that question a lot. Recommend using Google Translate, but if that's the only resource that you have available, please feel free to use it, because I know the Hispanic community will appreciate you if you have something in Spanish, because something is better than nothing.
All right. I heard that message a lot from all of you, do something is better than nothing, and don't feel like you have to do it alone. That seemed to be a big takeaway from this, that it's a community effort to reach a community. Cynthia answered this. This was a question in the chat, but in case folks don't have their chat open, I want to make sure that they saw, does Arlington create content specifically for the Spanish-speaking community that's not necessarily published in English? And the answer to that was yes. Content is created specifically for the Spanish-speaking community, and the Spanish website allows them to publish organic Spanish content. And she's dropped in the website and the Facebook channel there. I'll start working through my wrap up, but please feel free, audience, you're still here. We have about 9 minutes. So if there are questions, you can drop them in. But one question I have for you all, and I'll say it's perfectly selfish on my part, because we are building our trusted network partners here in Plano. So tell me, those of you who have trusted networks, what does a reasonable ask look like when you're building those partnerships? And so you're coming to the table. What is reasonable to ask those folks in terms of partnering? No thoughts?
I think our conversation was probably a little bit different than some other folks on the panel simply because we don't provide direct services as an organization. And so a lot of those conversations do come out of our council members talking to each other of, where are issues that we see in the state and what do our council members want to focus on? And a lot of those conversations then turn into requests for funding application when we have the capacity to do so. And so we have organizations coming to us very often going, here's a need that we see, here's what we would love to do in our community. But outside of those, it's a lot of just conversations with people who live the everyday life of a person with a developmental disability or their direct families. We don't try to lead a conversation unless we were asked to. And so a lot of it is finding what that need is and then creating partnerships based off of the need that we find. And so, like I had discussed for our Best Shot Street team that was developed out of COVID, a lot of that was, hey, individuals with developmental disabilities and their families want information about the COVID vaccine, but they're not sure where to go and they're not sure who to trust and they don't know how to start these conversations. And so we went, well, why don't we find people who do know the information or that is willing to learn the information to have conversations within their broader community.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think you're asking about, as you're forming coalitions,
Mm.
so a reasonable ask, and most coalitions are going to be formed around a specific topic. So maybe it's a housing issue or a safety issue or, transportation or whatever the issue may be. So I think that a reasonable ask would be help the group understand what you're doing in this space. We all love to talk about what we do, and then also to determine, if this is the focus for our group, who's not at the table, who needs to be at the table, so that you're leveraging those contacts and that knowledge of the community, so that you're broadening the coalition. And then, I think it's important for coalitions to be able to identify, what are our resource needs? How well can those needs be met within the coalition? If there are needs beyond the coalition, what can we do as a group to kind of fill that gap?
Excellent. Well, thank you all for that. I haven't seen any additional questions come in, and so I think we've given our audience a lot to think about today. As you all know, we record all of our webinars, and this will be published on the Tamio website in the next few days, so you can go back and refer to it. I know I will be. There will not be a webinar in June. We'll be back with you in July, and that's because conference is in 2 weeks in San Antonio, and if you haven't reserved your spot, there's still room for you. We'd love to see you down there. It's going to be a special conference, our 50th anniversary as an organization. It's going to be a great time. There's a great set of programming, and so it's a wonderful time to elevate your professional skills. But until then, thank you so much to our panelists, Donnie, Cynthia, Crystal. We've appreciated learning from you all. This was very informative. It's been a great discussion today. So thank you again, and thank you, Tamio. We'll see you in 2 weeks.